Welcome to the Tuesday, February 26th continuation of the Board of Education meeting and public hearing on driver's education waiver of rules. The board has been in closed session since 6 p.m. discussing student residency, pending litigation, negotiations, and approval of the January 22nd, 2013 and the February 12th, 2013 closed session minutes. We have 7 board members present, none absent, and the next thing on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item on our agenda is the public hearing on driver education waiver of rules. So first of all, we have 7 board members present, none absent. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Pernot for an overview of the waiver.
Yes, according to Section 2724.2 of the School Code, district may charge a reasonable fee not to exceed that amount specified in the code, which is $250, for students who participate in a driver's education course approved in accordance with this part of the school code. No other fee or portion thereof shall be charged to students and attributed to the driver's education course. As used in this part, reasonable fee means a fee calculated by dividing the sum of the documented annual district costs for items such as instructional materials, if not included in the district's textbook rental fee, the cost of the driver's education, car maintenance costs, fuel, and insurance by the number of students enrolled or participating in the driver's education course. The district costs used in this calculation do not include any portion of the salaries or benefits of school district personnel. For the purpose of this calculation, the cost of the driver's ed cars that are purchased by the district shall be amortized over a 5-year period, and the cost of leasing cars included in the fee calculation. The intent of the code is to provide a quality program for students related to the operation of motor vehicles. All of our teachers are certified. They receive a minimum of 30 clock hours of classroom instruction taught by certified high school teachers and a minimum of 6 clock hours of individuals behind the wheel. The current requirement that the cost used in this calculation should not include portion of salaries and benefits does not recognize the extraordinary high cost associated with our program in District's 205 integrated 2-phase driver's education cost. So the purpose of tonight is to have a public hearing with a request to waive that portion of the school code. A portion of the fee charged to students would go to salaries for our district personnel. We feel this is justified given that we have, again, certified staff, a 2-phase program, and a program that goes beyond the usual driver's education program. Again, to be able to offer this quality program, we are requesting that part of the fees charged to students be allowed to be used towards salaries and benefits for school personnel in this waiver.
Okay. Is there any discussion before I go to public comments? Mr. McDonough.
This ceiling, this $250 ceiling, is in essence an unfunded mandate. And through this procedure, we're working around an unfunded mandate.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Mrs. Durrani?
But we're not going to charge any more than $250. We're just going to reallocate the fee that we get, right? We're not asking to charge more than $250.
As a matter of fact, if we were requesting to charge more than $250, we would have to ask for a waiver of the General Assembly and a whole process with that. We are not asking for that. We are just asking for an allocation to be permitted to go to salaries for personnel currently teaching the driver's ed program.
And where did the money go? Where does it go now before the waiver? If it's
I believe we have always asked for this waiver. I believe. Chris, do you know?
I don't.
The $250 fee is new this year.
No.
I mean, we charged less in previous years.
Not much.
I believe last
We
year
increased
paid
it last year
$150.
to $250.
Right. The year before that, it was $150.
Right.
I don't know. I don't recall asking for a waiver like this before.
Being the parent of a sophomore, I took careful notes.
I was going to say, I thought it was $245.
$245, same as last year. Let me see the history. Sorry. The driver ed fee in 2012-13 was $245. In 11-12, it was $156. 10-11, $156. 2009-10, $156. 2008-9, $156.
Mrs. Hirsch?
I remember discussing this with Diana Smith, the York principal, when we were looking at reimbursement. And I think this is just a workaround in order to maximize the reimbursement from the state. This is unrelated to what we actually charge. We obviously aren't reimbursed by the state enough to cover the cost of providing driver's education. It's a percentage, and I think that the waiver is required in order for us to maximize the possibility of reimbursement from the state. So I don't think it has anything to do with what we charge.
And my understanding, and correct me, is the majority of the fee increase will be going to purchase new driver's ed cars, right? I mean, our current fleet of driver's ed cars, some of them are 15 years old.
I think we do have some older cars, and we bought a new car this year, and our plan is to buy a new car each year. So we'll be replacing one vehicle every year, and that's definitely part of the fee increase. Yes.
Are there any other board comments before I go to public comments? Hearing none. Next is the public comment section of just this public hearing on driver education waiver of rules. Now, I have no cards, and we hardly have an audience. And unless somebody raises their hand, I'm going to assume there will be no public comments on this. Okay. Hearing no public comments. Any other board comments? Then we adjourn and return to our regular meeting. So next on our agenda is student and staff recognition, which Mr. Pernot has wisely suspended for this evening. Given the inclement weather today, it's better that our students are home safe and doing their homework on a day where it's tough to drive. But I do want to acknowledge one absent face in the audience. Dan McCleister is from the Elmhurst Independent, is usually at the press table, and he has spent the last several weeks in the hospital. My understanding, I just learned that he just got out of the hospital, so I would just, on behalf of the board, want to express our best wishes to him to a speedy recovery. The next is public comments. Again, I have no cards. We have few people in the audience, so unless someone raises their hand, we'll move past public comments. All right. Next is superintendent's communications. Mr. Pernot.
First item is FOIA requests. We had one FOIA request in the past month. It was a request regarding custodial janitorial service, and that was received and granted. That was the only FOIA request we received. Next item is year 14 budget discussion. Board of Education wanted budget discussion on all upcoming board agendas, so we have included this. And I do believe the board has a desire to discuss our next step in the process from our last board meeting of restructuring and moving forward on informing the community of some of the economic difficulties that the district is experiencing.
One question, could I ask to flip the TIF 4 in the budget? Because TIF 4 is a component, it was one of the big questions that had come out of the budget. If we could address that first and then get into the budget, because that made me remove a few questions around the budget. Is there?
If it's all right with the board, I would then propose we flip those two agenda items, because the flow does make a little more sense. Okay? All right. So let's talk about TIF for a minute here.
Okay. And
Mr. Bloom?
Yeah, I've got an update on TIF that I can provide to the group. Just a quick recap on where we are, and we have agreement with the city on the following points, and I think 2 of these we already knew, and the third one I think we've got a proposed resolution to. But the first one is the first part of the agreement is $1 million to District 205. It's really $1.5 million of surplus declaration out of TIF 2, of which our portion would be approximately $1 million. It's payable no earlier than 60 or later than 120 days. So it's in a window. I think before we had stated that time frame a little different, but the agreement is between 60 and 120. The second piece is 10% of the tax increment generated, property tax increment generated in TIF 4 beginning in the 11th year. Again, the city estimates this could be as much as $4 million over the life of the TIF. This is contingent upon the performance of the TIF. So I mean, everybody needs to understand that it could be 0 if the TIF doesn't work. It could be more if the TIF does really well. And the third piece is up to $6 million in reimbursement for TIF eligible capital funds expended by District 205 on Churchville and/or Conrad Fisher. And this last point is the point we've been negotiating with the city in an effort to get more clarity around the conditions under which the funds would be made available to satisfy this promise. While the city's original proposal left the discretion as to the timing and the amounts of the payments entirely up to them, they have repeatedly indicated a willingness to work with us on finding language that would address our concern. Recently, given the difficulty we've had in coming up with mutually acceptable language, the city has instead proposed to dedicate a portion of the property tax increment generated from the Han, CVS, Panera, basically those properties that were moved from TIF 1 to TIF 4. It's towards as a, I guess I would call this a piece of collateral to support that portion of their promise, to give us a bit more certainty to demonstrate their good faith in intending to honor that $6 million commitment. But what we would have is the ability to directly point to 35% of the property tax increment generated by those properties. And the way it would work is it's after they recoup the additional investment that we put into those properties. So those properties would be developed, the additional money that would be put into those properties for development would be recouped, and then we would share in that a dedicated cash flow stream that would be dedicated towards that $6 million commitment. The city has estimated that this is would cover about $3 million of the $6 million they promised. So the way I look at it is we have, out of the $6 million promised, they have given us, visibility into a cash flow stream that would cover 3 of it. The other 3 is still trust us. But that said, the offer was an attempt to close, to give us a bit more certainty and demonstrate that they were serious about getting us this money. Now, I do need to say too that this is a percentage of increment. So again, like the 10%, it's reliant on the performance of the TIF, of those properties within the TIF. So again, if it didn't work, it could be 0. If it did work, we could actually have more than $3 million of collateral, I'll say, but behind that commitment. It doesn't mean that they're offering us more than the $6 million. It just means that this is the security of the collateral behind it. So they will dedicate that cash flow stream towards that $6 million. So coming out of the meeting, that was what they had put on the table, and I think that there was some language that was circulated to the board around a tentative draft contract. I think there are some things that we need to tighten up on the contract, but I think the purpose of the meeting is to gain consensus on the board about where we are with respect to what's on the table right now. Jim, if you want to.
I can just paraphrase a couple of things that Mr. Bloom said. So we've agreed on the $1.5 million surplus from TIF 2 being paid to all the taxing bodies once this incremental agreement is signed, or once this intergovernmental agreement is signed. We've agreed to meet with the city in an interval no greater than every 5 years to talk to them about what their plans for economic development in TIF 4 is. We've agreed that beginning in year 11, 10% of the increment that's being generated in TIF 4 will be paid out to the other taxing bodies. And the final piece was the $6 million, which the city was kind enough to draw into the boundaries of TIF 4, Churchville and Conrad Fisher schools. So this, and they have agreed to pay us up to $6 million for capital improvements to those schools. and those schools need far more than $6 million of capital improvements. What we were unsatisfied with was that just came in a trust me. And we were looking for something a little bit more definite than a trust me. So what the city has now come back to us with is, we know in TIF 4 there's one known user of funds, and that's the Mariano's grocery store. And there's one, the first project that is the most likely generator of funds would be the Hahn Street development. So they've agreed to essentially give us a percentage of the cash flow off of that Hahn Street development and the other properties, as Mr. Bloom pointed out, to give us approximately 35% of that cash flow that comes from that after any additional investment they make. And their projections show that to be about $3 million. I see that as a very strong offer because they've agreed to collateralize their promise off of that cash flow. In my mind, that's earned them the trust me on the other $3 million. So let me open up to the board and see what the board's views are. If you want us to return back to the negotiating table with the city, or whether we as a board like this and it's just a matter of, like this in concept, and it's just a matter of putting it all on paper that we can agree to. Mrs. Hirsch.
I just have a question. At the League of Women Voters Candidate Forum on Sunday, the mayoral candidates, several of them mentioned removing this property from the TIF as quickly as it can be. Once it's developed, they want to remove it from the TIF. How does that impact our ability to recoup? If it's released from the TIF, there's no increment that's feeding the TIF. We're getting 35% of I'm not sure I'm understanding. If they release these properties from the TIF prior to the 23-year life of the TIF, what does that mean to this deal?
So actually, that wouldn't be bad for us. That would be better for us, in that we would get new growth. It would come into the tax base as new growth, which we would be able to assess against, and then we would be able to assess against that EAV. None of it would go into the TIF, and our pro rata share of the property tax bill in town is 67 or 68?
66%.
66%. So we get 66% of the increment in that case. So it actually, if they were to return it to the tax rolls, we would actually get more cash flow off of it. Does that make sense?
So
Mrs.
to that point, my understanding previously to your comment tonight, Mr. Collins, was that it was attached to all property, but I thought that recently it was only going to be attached to the Hahn Street.
Yeah, the 6 is attached to the entire TIF. What the city has offered is this dedicated cash flow stream as an additional, it's something we can point to and carve out. The TIF is making the promise, and the city is taking a piece of all of the cash flow in the TIF and taking that and earmarking it for making good on this promise. So this is still paid out of the entire TIF. This is just something that we can then point to a specific claim within that bigger pool of cash that the TIF is generating.
Okay.
Does that help?
I think so.
Okay.
Mrs. Ebner?
And is there any kind of time frame for when they would recoup their investment? Because, with the 10% revenue sharing, it says the 11th year. But with recouping, I didn't see any time frame. Is there an estimate?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. If it was probably, I think it was close to 10 years before it kicked in. They shared a, back in the envelope calculation that they had made, and it was, it had to get developed. So I think they were figuring it was going to take a couple years before it really started generating increment, and then they had to recoup the cost that they were going to put into it, and then they would start sharing. And I'm guessing, I can get an answer for you, but I think it was projected to somewhere around year 10 or 11.
So the same time when the revenue sharing would kick in?
From the other.
Do we want to have any time frame in there, or we have to leave it nothing?
The problem
No
with
time
the problem with any TIF is that, it takes about a decade to generate much of an increment at all. to pay anything out of. And they've already pledged their beginning increment to the Mariano's store that's under construction. So we would have to be, behind that increment. So, in any TIF, it's tough to generate much in excess cash flow, before year 10. So just by the nature of it. Mr. McDonough.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, the recovery of costs and expenses refers to those things coming out of TIF 4, not the recovery of those expenditures that were made out of TIF 1 funds for the acquisition of the property. Is that right?
That's my understanding.
And if there's a complete reconsideration of Han again, nobody expected Han not to go the first time, but stranger things have happened, then we should probably lay out there that, we're going to need to revisit this because all of a sudden this collateral, as you put it, has some problems. So.
But I guess here's the question, though. By the time that happens, I'm hoping that you would see some increment within the TIF. And to Karen's point, the $6 million comes out of the entire TIF. This is just something to point to. And so if this were to be zero, that doesn't mean that we get zero. It just means that, the cash would come from some other place. And, the city would then have full discretion on when and how much to give us at what point in time. But, that said, the city has indicated a willingness to make sure that we get this money if the TIF performs. And this is just something to help us sleep a little bit easier, but at the end of the day, it's not something that is going to, if it didn't work or they had to redevelop Han a third time, that it would impact the obligation of the $6 million.
The promise is still there for the full $6 million. It's just that there's a guarantee on the timing of it that it will be not less than, or at least the first half of it, will be not less than 35% of the increment generated by Han after TIF 4 expenditures are recouped. Is that right?
Right. What it's basically doing is it's removing their discretion with respect to a portion of the cash flow stream out of TIF 4.
Yeah.
So they're willing to give up discretion as it pertains to that piece, which, to Jim's point, was, good faith offer to say, hey, we told you to trust us. We'll give you something to hang your hat on.
I want to thank the city for listening to us that we needed to give to our taxpayers something more than trust them. And I'm grateful that they've looked at a different way of doing this, and I'm thankful that, there's something very substantive on the table right now.
Given that in Illinois law, the TIF owes the other taxing bodies really nothing, I think it's a great credit to our city council for stepping up and actually, what I'll use the term collateralizing part of the payment that they promised us in this, and that they're sharing quite a bit of money out of the TIF with the school district and the other taxing bodies. And I applaud them for that. That's, in my mind, the right way to go about it. Anything else on this topic? So, Mrs. Durrani?
The only thing that still troubles me a little bit is this definition of unencumbered funds. That's still a really, trust me, item. They're defined as those funds which are not required by the city to pay for current or future TIF-eligible expenses or commitments, and beginning when the city has recouped all costs and expenses associated with the acquisition and development of the southern properties, which are the Han Street, right? That's what we're calling southern properties. Then we'll get the 35%. I hear you. The city could just do whatever they want with the TIF, but I thought the whole reason we entered into this was because we had this TIF 1 sitting there that they have altered now, and that, in fact, they do owe us a little something here based on that. So my question is, has this passed the blessing of our attorney?
Our attorney has not ruled on their specific language. They got us the specific language
Monday night, so just last night. So I have emailed it to our legal, but I have not heard back yet.
Okay. So are you looking for something from us before we've even heard from our attorney? I'm a little confused on the order of these
here's what
things.
I'm asking. Here's what I'm asking. With what Mr. Bloom has described in concept, are we okay with that? Or would we like to return to the table and insist upon more certainty behind the $6 million? Or would we just like to pursue making sure that our legal counsel is fine with the wording, and that in fact the agreement as worded accurately describes what the city told us their intent was? And that's really the question before the board tonight. Mr. Bloom.
And let me add that the process would be that if we're okay on the business terms of this agreement, the language needs to get tightened up from what you read. This would come then back before the board as a completed agreement for us to vote on at that point in time. So you would see this again at a future meeting. We don't want to spend legal fees running down the road to document something until the board has agreed in concept on the business points. And so I think what Jim's asking is are we okay if the agreement reads the way we understand the business deal to be? Are we okay with that?
Exactly. So are we okay with what the city's presented us to us orally, and taking a first crack at what you've all been able to read last night and this morning, and tighten up that language, which we think needs a little tightening up? Or do we go back to the city and say, this is a great first step, but how about some more? Mr. Bloom.
I'll add one more piece, and you can call it a negotiating play or whatnot, but when this was offered, it was said that it was best and final, and the city always has the option to basically take everything off the table at some point in time. So if we were to go back and ask for more, there's no guarantee that we're going to get it, and we could end up with less. Again, as in any negotiation, we could end up with more too, but I'm just saying that this isn't one of these deals where we just keep asking and keep getting. And I'll throw my personal opinion, and I think that this is a pretty good deal. I think the city's come a long way in helping us out, and my recommendation would be to go ahead and get this documented and get the agreement on the agenda for the next meeting.
Mrs. Durrani.
One other concern is you're saying we have to tighten up the language. That's where we were last September, saying we had to tighten up the language. I'm not quite sure what the difference is.
Well, the difference this time is they're willing to collateralize part of that cash flow. I mean, what last September, my concern was of the $10 million that's come in the way of the schools from TIF 4, 6 of the $10 million was really on a trust me. And personally, I was a little uncomfortable with such a large proportion of it being totally on trust me. Even though I had there's no real grounds to hold the city suspect at all. But I would just feel more comfortable that the board has served the students of this community well if we had a little tighter promise than that. And that's what the city has come back with, is a much tighter promise than that. In fact, they've identified a cash flow stream of which they will earmark or guarantee us 35% of. And it happens to be the cash flow stream that is, most likely the first positive cash flow stream of revenues to come into TIF 4.
On street, you think, not Mariano's?
Well, Mariano's will be a user of funds. It won't be a generator of funds. I mean, it will pay. It's
going to generate funds.
Well,
that's
yes,
the whole
it'll
idea
pay
of bringing
property.
it in, right?
It'll pay property taxes, but the city's offered them $1.25 million incentive to build it. Go ahead,
I'll make one comment too. There was a comment that John had made about the language and the looseness of the language, and I had some confusion too. So I picked up the phone and called Mayor Levin and talked to him a couple hours ago, and he had indicated that that he agreed to, that it was loose and that we could tighten it up. And so, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't agree to language, but we kicked around something that said, can we change city to, North York Road, TIF, either or. I mean, there's some things. So my point is that it's not where it was, where we were trying to figure out, we were waiting for them to propose language and we were going to kick it back or not. I mean, we really are at that very close point, and we are in agreement on the terms. There's just a few words that need to get tightened up, I think.
Mr. McDonough?
I think we really need to see the language before we, express a positive or negative. The other thing is, I think we're acting, in a sense, as trustees for our taxpayers when we make these intergovernmental agreements. I think we have an obligation to put the thing out there and show people what's on the table before we vote for it. And so I'd like to see some time and some opportunity for comment to know what people feel about this. I'm encouraged by what I heard. The language didn't look exactly like I expected it. I take, I'm optimistic that that's just, loose drafting and something we could tie up. But I think we also need to hear, from the people who will pay the bills on this, which is taxpayers, because it's all property tax money, and make sure that, this makes sense to them as well as us. I don't know what the method is. I think when there's an agreement, I think it should be something that people can go online, they can read, take a look at. Yeah, there are going to be some people that want to take apart and do it a different way and say something different. That's all well and good. That's just what you put up with when you seek some public input on something. I just want to make sure that that's got an opportunity for people to see it.
So
I think this discussion goes a long way towards that, but I think the document also should be something that people can take a look at.
So would you propose that if, and I think our goal should be to have a document in front of this board by our next regularly scheduled board meeting, for the board to tentatively approve that document, have a time for public comment between that board meeting and the following board meeting where we would actually vote to ratify the agreement. Is that something like what you're proposing? I
don't have a specific proposal. I'm looking for someone to, tell me, how do we get public input on this?
Mrs. Hirsch?
Actually, I don't know that we have an obligation to solicit public input on this. When you talk about the taxpayers that we represent, they're the same taxpayers that are aldermen in our city. This is primarily, the majority of them are the same taxpayers. Okay. My point is, Mr. McDonough, that as the Board of Education, we have an opportunity to enter into an agreement with our partners at the city, and they are doing us a favor. They could give us nothing. This has been going on for a very long time. I think we take the business proposal that's been put in front of us, we have our attorneys review it for proper language, and then we put it to a vote by this Board of Education.
Mrs. Ebner.
I'm in agreement with the structure of this. I think the city has done a good faith effort and they didn't have to do it. And also, John, if you've got public comment or input, you're going to change the document? You change the terms of the agreement? I don't understand how we would use how the procedure would work. Maybe we need to think about it, but that would be very complicated.
Let me just say something that I disagree with the idea that the city doesn't have to do it. The city signed an agreement in 2004. The city gave the district an expectation of TIF surplus with an intact TIF 1. When the city determined that it was best for economic development purposes to remove a piece of TIF 1 and thereby change the calculation under the TIF 1 agreement from 2004, they changed things. This is not a gift. This is not a charity. What we're doing is we're looking at the assets that we hold on behalf of all the taxpayers of District 205 who are not the same taxpayers as the city. We are nearly coterminous, but not exactly coterminous. We have people that have absolutely no involvement with the city of Elmhurst that are paying taxes to our district. So we have a responsibility to remain independent, an independent body of that. But I disagree that it is a gift, a favor. I think we look at it in terms of the things that we were.
I didn't say.
Okay. I'm sorry, you said the city doesn't have to do this. The city
According to Illinois statute, the city is not required to enter into an intergovernmental agreement. It is an optional piece of the TIF litigation which allows governmental agencies to enter into an additional intergovernmental agreement. Now, whether we individually or we as a board may feel as though the city owes us something because they moved part of the properties from TIF 1 into TIF 4, I have opinions on it. I'm sure we all have opinions on it. I'm sure many of the citizens have opinions on it. But at this point, we have an opportunity to enter into a new intergovernmental agreement with the city on this new TIF, and it is advantageous to our schools. So I think it's time to move ahead with this.
Mr. Bloom.
So our next meeting is on the 19th. We have 3 weeks, right? So the question would be if we had language back that was proposed and we posted it and invited people to the next board meeting for comment, if they, we have public comment period. I mean, would you be comfortable? I mean, we'll put it out there for everybody, and we'll vote on it at the next board meeting. And if anybody wants to give us their 2 cents before we vote, they're welcome to come and comment at that meeting. But would that timeline work for you?
Again, I'm looking for a way of bringing this out. We negotiated this. Both sides negotiated in good faith. We were both diligently representing our interests, and I'm glad about that. But I am remembering what happened from a process like that in 2004. And there were some very unhappy people who felt that the board did not listen to its constituency in this aspect. And I think it resulted in a fairly divided board at the time. And I just think it would be something that before we vote on this, I think we should give the public an opportunity to see it. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the best way to, solve this. But there was an issue in 2004, and I'm looking to avoid that. That's all.
Mrs. Steuven?
So if this board decides that we're going to have public comment, I think that time frame I agree with that time frame. It can't be any longer.
Now, let me get back to, for a minute, we're going into all sorts of procedural stuff here. Let me just go back to, for a minute, to get consensus of the board whether they would like to spend legal fees to get the agreement that we have in principle in writing that the board can live with. Is that the will of the board, that the deal proposed to us is adequate, that we were willing to spend the money to have the lawyers put it on paper?
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. McDonough?
I think we need to hear from the attorney about the entire document.
Yes, I mean, yes, absolutely.
And so that I think it's a little hard to say.
Right,
yes,
so
that's the deal we want, and
we should
everything.
move forward.
I think this is a great positive step. I think it's a very good offer for us to take a look at, but I'm not prepared to say yes, that's it.
So, all right. So we're in agreement that we're going to send this to our attorney, have him negotiate with the city's attorneys, put this on paper for us to take another look at. Perhaps, I mean, would the board be in agreement with posting that document for the public to take a look at, and invite the public to our meeting 3 weeks from now, assuming all this is done in that time frame, right? If all this is done the night before the meeting, it's kind of a moot point. But assuming there's enough time to actually post it and invite public comment on that agreement in our next regularly scheduled board meeting on the 19th of March. Is that what I'm hearing that the board would like to move forward with? Let me start with Mr. Bloom, and then Mrs. Stufen, and then Mrs. Hirsch.
Yeah, can I just be, I mean, I'll give you my opinion. I think that we should get it done, we should get it posted, and we should expect to take a final vote at the next board meeting. That's what I would like to do. And I think I hear John, and I agree. I think that having that posted, I think that we've done our obligation. It'll be posted, let's hope within the next week we'll have it finished. We can have it up for almost 2 weeks. And the public should be invited to come talk to us at that point in time at the next meeting, and then I think we should vote on putting this to bed at that point. That's my 2 cents.
Mrs. Stufen.
Yeah, Mr. Bloom actually clarified what I was going to say, because if we were to wait 2 more meetings, it's April 23rd, and I just think it's too late.
Mrs. Hirsch.
Just one modification. If we can get it back from the attorney, have it a quick internal review for board members to give us 48 hours to look at it and make sure that there aren't any glaring problems before it gets posted publicly. I mean, if it comes back from the attorney, we see that there's some kind of problem that we can't support it, then let's, but I don't anticipate that that's going to happen. But as a board member, I'm requesting that I can have 48 hours to review it before it gets posted publicly.
I think that's a reasonable request. Are we all in agreement with that request? Mrs. Deroni?
And if board members do have problems, will we call a special meeting? I mean, are we in that big of a hurry to get this done on March 19th? Well, I mean, I agree with Mr. McDonough that I'd like to see what the attorney has to say about the entire agreement as well as the language before I can say that, yes, this is what we should go with. I mean, was our attorney not at these meetings where this business model came together? I'm a little confused.
At the last meeting, there were no attorneys present on either side.
So we don't know what's going to fly with the city attorneys either, right?
The document that's presented, the one that you see, is basically the same document we've been working off of for 3 months. Both attorneys have lawyered this document. There is one small section of text that's been added as a result of the agreement amongst the business folks. So that's what we're talking about. So if you're talking about the risk of the entire agreement being reviewed and somebody coming out with some ideas, this stuff's all been reviewed. It's one paragraph that we're talking about, and that would be what I think we all need to get comfortable with. So the lawyers have signed off on the other pieces, unless I'm misspeaking, John, but I think that they've looked at all the other mechanics. It's just one section that we're looking at right now.
I'd be cautious of saying both lawyers have signed off. I don't think we formally have asked the lawyers to sign off on the language. There's been language back and forth, but and maybe I missed it, but I did not hear, we're fine with everything but this on both sides.
Wrong word, but both lawyers have reviewed and drafted and sent comments back and forth with respect to this document. I guess I was too strong. It has not been, it is not like it's been sitting around and we're going to now have everybody look at the whole thing. They have gone through parts and had opportunities to surface issues with those parts. Now once we get this last piece signed off or finished, then we would ask a sign off on the whole thing. But I'm saying from a surprise standpoint, people have seen all of this for the last 3 months.
Right, I understand that, but the language we were using was both sides have agreed, and that's...
Yeah.
So let me just restate what I think I'm hearing and tell me if I'm hearing this correctly. We support sending it to both parties' attorneys, asking those attorneys for a short turnaround time as they can possibly get us. At least a 48-hour period for the board to review it. If a board member has a serious problem with it, they would contact Mr. Pernot. Mr. Pernot tallies enough people that would put the agreement in jeopardy, then we don't publish it and we send the lawyers back to negotiate further. If there are no strong objections to it, then we publish it, and with the intent, assuming that all this works, that we would then be inviting public comment at our March 19th board meeting, talk to the public about it, and take a vote on it at that time. Is that the procedure that we all? Okay, so it sounds like we have consensus of the board for that procedure. Okay, all right, so we can move ahead from there. And that brings us then back to budget. Mr. Bloom.
Okay. And the reason I'd asked to flip that is I think, Susan, you had a big question about the TIF and as it pertains to plugging the shortfall for next year, and hopefully this takes us at least a step closer to feeling more comfortable about that. We talked about this in the Finance and Ops Committee meeting, so I just kind of want to update the board on kind of the thinking. You guys, we sat around the table and we said, okay, where do we go from here? And we said we'd take that into committee, and out of that came a few things. There's a couple of pieces here. The first is, as we talked about, the 13-14 budget, there's still a remaining process. I think, we've gotten to the point where we've said that we're not going to cut for next year. But there are still items within the budget that need to continue to be explored. That's something that the Finance and Ops Committee is working with the administration, and the budget will be on the agenda going forward, and we will start to talk about these things like, for instance, the technology plan and what are we investing $2.7 million in, the link to the DPIs that I've heard. So I just want everybody to know we're not losing sight of that, and that's something that I think we'll take responsibility for in the Finance and Ops Committee meeting and making sure that that doesn't get lost. The second piece is the long-term structural discussion for fiscal 15 and beyond, the 14-15 year. And what we had talked about was there are a number of steps to this process, or a number of pieces to this process. I think the first chunk is an explanation of the current situation and what's driving it, both from an operational and a capital standpoint. And we talked about this the last board meeting. We talked about it in the Finance and Ops Committee meeting. And I think, we had mentioned that. And I've spoken with members from the Board Improvement Committee that, there's a process which gathering the questions and the key points from the other board members, so submitting, what are the things about the current state, and I'll let Board Improvement Committee members comment on this too, but gathering information, developing developing the content to make sure that we're all on the same page with the same message, and then, the process, the timeline, the communication plan that promotes stakeholder engagement and avoids rush decision making, and so there's that chunk of work that's to be done, and the question I think coming out of that to the board as a whole here is that it seems like the Board Improvement Committee is a logical place. The members of that committee have indicated a desire to be the quarterback on this. And I guess I would ask the question to the whole board as to whether that, that we're all in agreement with that as the next step forward on that chunk of what we have to come. So anybody have ideas or questions?
It's for the current state for the board improvement?
Yeah, and there's a couple of pieces, and I'll get into the other ones now, but in a minute. But I wanted to chunk this up and kind of we've had a discussion. Yeah, that's called current state. Kind of an explanation of what kind of how we got here, what's driving the situation that we're in, and that in crafting that message so that when we go out and communicate it, that all of us are talking from the same playbook. And I agreed that it's a logical spot to be in the Board Improvement Committee, and I think that the question at the board table is we, the 7 of us, have to make the decision to ask the Board Improvement Committee to take the lead on developing this and executing that part of the plan. So.
I'm sorry, I was looking down here. I'm not sure. Did you mention this idea that each of us would talk to our liaison schools about the current situation as a good place to start in terms of, once we're together on the same page in terms of what our explanation and is our narrative should be?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I was just getting into the who's going to grab what piece of this. That's part of the communication plan. It's an idea that had been brought up. I didn't get into the details. I wasn't going to drag everybody into that. Now I'm actually kind of parceling out the work at this point in time, but that I would expect that to be part of what the Board Improvement Committee comes out with is kind of what is that message, or help us craft the message as a board, and then who are we going to talk to, how are we going to roll this out, and rather than solve that at the board table here, I think task the Board Improvement Committee with coming up with that process.
Mrs. Stufen.
Thank you. I just want to kind of level set, right? After the last board meeting, what we said is, and Chris Walton has told us, and we all know this, our expenses are outpacing our revenues. That's the big picture issue. And so the last meeting we said, what can we do? We can, cut cut expenses, and we said, what we really want to do is there's a structural deficit, so let's start having this conversation about what the issues are. So what we're talking about now, just kind of bigger picture to, kind of slice in where you are and make sure that I'm understanding it and everyone else is that explaining what the reality is fiscally. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're talking about, these questions, and board improvement committee working on what those questions are based on, years of discussion, right? And the realities and the facts and the figures, right? And then...
Yeah, it's explaining the drivers of the structural deficit. And so there's more to this, but, we're trying to chunk this up into pieces. And so I think the first piece of the discussion, I think, one of the things that had come up in our committee too is that, let's not wait until we get, everything figured out. We know that that's a discussion we need to start having, so let's start working on that piece. There's another piece as it pertains to what are our options to deal with it, which I think you're starting to get into. That's probably going to take a little bit longer to figure out, but let's not hold up the discussion with the community about what the drivers are and the explanation. Let's get going on that. And so that's why I stopped there just for this piece. I've got a few more questions on the other thing. But so if we're okay with it, then I think that the Board Improvement Committee should grab that and own it. Are there any objections to that?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that everyone, we as a board are discussing this approach and what, not just one of the pieces are, but, really kind of how we're going to wrap our arms around, looking at something different versus just keep continuously cutting because our expenses are
and that's absolutely the purpose of this conversation.
Okay, I just want to level set.
And I think we all 7 of us are committed to carrying the water on this for the long term. I think when we talk about committees, it's more like that's kind of keeping us all honest and making sure that we're having these conversations and being an aggregator and a facilitator. So I don't by any means suggest that we vest the power in 3 individuals in a committee to decide to speak for the board, and I don't think anybody around here is. But it's more from a project management standpoint that we can each take pieces of this. This is a big project, a big program to run here, and and thank the folks that have reached out and said, hey, can we do pieces of this? So that absolutely, this should be an ongoing board discussion at this board table with progress updates every time we get together. So,
Mrs. Hirsch.
I'm still not sure that I understand what you're asking Board Improvement to do. I think all 7 board members are well versed in this story, if you will, that we need to share with the taxpayers, with their parents, with their constituents, that we have a problem. Expenditures are outpacing revenues, whether the state's not paying, whether it's pensions, whatever the reasons are. We know that story. So are you looking for board improvement to encapsulate that? What's the outcome? What's the work product? Is it a PowerPoint presentation that all 7 board members are going to deliver to every school and every community meeting? I'm not sure I understand what exactly, what the end result, what's the product, work product? What's going to happen?
I can add to that. I think there's an element, I think when we talked about this in finance, I think it was, first of all, you all have your constituencies that talk to you on a regular basis about a variety of issues. The one thing we want to do first was capture the questions and the elements and the issues that you hear out there to the community. Funnel that to the Board Improvement Committee. Those elements that we think we have to cover in explaining where we are financially and where we are structurally in the district. So if there are questions or issues that community members are coming to you, just so we make sure that we cover that. And then I think we talked about doing a presentation that all board members would have, PowerPoint or whatever, and that would be the piece that you would go out as the liaisons to the community, to your schools, to everything else, and have the common PowerPoint. But we wanted to make sure, I think, in the committee that we hit all the themes that you were hearing out in the community, and you're the people that know that. You're the people that talk to a lot of community members about the school board, about the district, about all of that. So we wanted to capture those elements so there's not a big issue out there. We're just not covering that. That's a big question for the community. So that's what we conceptually talked about. Then from there, the Board Improvement Committee would work with Malia, the administrative staff, to put together that PowerPoint for board members and then disseminate that to board members. And then we would put together a schedule, a timeline, and a list of which constituents you're going to present that to. That was my understanding. So
we'll have administrative support in terms of the content areas, whether it's curriculum, what we're doing in the curriculum area, what we're doing in finance, what we're doing in the various areas. We would have, I don't want to ask the Board Improvement Committee, whose original task was policy and improving the 7 of us, our practices. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what that role is that we're asking them to do.
This came about not because it just happened to be that, I think John indicated a desire, and both Shannon and Karen reached out, and they happen to be the committee. I mean, if you want to divide and conquer in different ways, it probably shouldn't get hung up on committees. It's just there are certain groups of us that are going to take pieces.
Well, also, in our Board Improvement Committee, we've been working on a PowerPoint to present to the legislators, and this is the same story. So we already have a rough draft, well, I don't want to say rough draft. We have pieces already put together. And so it made sense to me to just keep building off of that and bring in anything else that we're missing.
Mr. McDonough's been trying to break in here for a while.
Just want to say, my view is that the Board Improvement Committee acts as an editor for the 7 authors, with the administration as the 8th big author of this piece that we're going to tell the story. And I think it becomes a much better story when all 7 bring their ideas there. And that's why I've been trying to urge everybody to please forward your particular story. As Dave put it, and Chris maybe put it, the elements that you think are important to telling that story, the pieces that need to come out. And our story becomes more effective when it's the result of all 7 of us, but you need someone in an editorial role to bring it all together to I think we're going to be saying a lot of the same things. Maybe we won't, and it takes an editor to say, okay, there's a little thing here, it needs to be resolved. Maybe we blending this, maybe we're, accentuating this part and not this other part. But ultimately, it's a piece that's owned by the entire 7 Board of Education, and it's the work of all 7.
Do we feel that we all now have a common understanding of what the goal is and where we're going? Mrs. Durrani?
I just want to add something that Mr. Pernod has introduced into it, which I think is really important, and that is for us as board members and people out in the community to bring to this story the things that the community, the rumors, the things that don't have a basis in fact, such as you got all that money with the 2006 referendum, you mismanaged it. That kind of thing. You wasted money on the 162 building. Anything that's out there, the teachers are too highly paid, all of that. We need to focus on those things that are roiling out there in the community that don't happen to be based on fact.
I mean, another question I think we need to answer is, in all of our projections, we keep using 2.5% inflation. And for the last 5 years, we haven't had 2.5% inflation. Would, in fact, if we had 2.5% inflation, would we not be having this discussion? I'd frankly like the Finance Committee to figure out the answer to that question. So, but yeah, Mrs. Durrani, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of what I'll call urban legends in Elmhurst. And we need to shed the light of truth on all those through this process. Keep going, Mr. Bloom.
All right, point number 2, second chunk. Identification of alternatives for a sustainable operating model. What are our options? So it's kind of understanding, explaining, kind of where we are today, and then talking about what are our options for going forward. And that's something that, I think, Dave has indicated and started conversations with respect to. That's something that I think Dave, the administration, and the staff They're the professionals in education, and will start to craft and help us craft. I think the question for the board is, we need to give Dave a sense of our thinking and expectations as he begins the process. And I will say that, what I've heard from the board is, there are a few things, as we guide Dave, as he puts together this operating model or options for operating models, I have heard, let's make sure that everything's on the table, but let's also make sure that everyone understands nothing's been decided. I think that I had heard an interest in, not looking like for an a la carte list of potential cuts to vote on. So, we're not expecting for Dave to come back with, do you like this or how much does it? I think what we're looking for is potential holistic models for the district that are sustainable and reflective of the community values and desired outcomes. I call this a lighthouse district. We haven't quite defined what that is yet, and that's another question I have later. But, and then, I think the other piece is I've heard that we highly encourage Dave and the administration to bring forth new ideas based on their experience, successful examples from other districts, best practices, that we want your best thinking no matter how controversial it might be. So I think that, we want to make sure that we throw that out there and ask for that. And I think people need to recognize that this is a healthy exercise that we're going to go through, and we're asking for best. Don't reject something until we've thoroughly investigated the pros and cons. And so, I'm playing back a little bit of what I heard, a little bit of what I think, but I think that we as the board here, I would love to get to consensus on what we're asking Dave, what our expectations are for Dave and his staff, his administration and the staff, as they formulate our options to come back with what's in bounds, what's out of bounds. Are we in agreement with some of the things I just said? Do you guys have things that you want to add to it or change?
Any comments on that?
I like what you said about comparing to other districts. I think that's a big part of this, to compare ourselves to other districts, what we're offering, what other districts are offering. I mentioned this at the last meeting, and really give the community a sense of what's going on outside of Elmhurst. And we can look at different tax rates and course offerings and what the high schools are doing, and I think that would be, it's a lot of work. I don't know if that's for the administration or the board, but that is an important piece of work, and it's a large piece of work too. Is that, where would that reside? Is that
my 2 cents? I'll use last night as an example. We were here and we saw a presentation on ELL from a couple of different districts, right, and how they did it. As Dave goes through and they start to put together this model, there may be some things that it would encourage them to look at those models and pull the things that work there. Looking at our situation and taking the stuff that made sense. So I would think that would. Now, there are aspects of comparison that fall within the story, the front and the current state, and it's kind of where are we vis-a-vis, other benchmarks. But as it pertains to developing this new model, I think that's what you're talking about is that would go into this. So what are innovative things that other districts are doing to address some of the similar challenges they face that we do? And so I think that's what we like to say is we'd like to hear those kinds of things and talk about those options. So anybody else?
Ms. Hirsch?
I would just caution us to be careful when we want to go out and look at those great districts and see what they're doing. We have to recognize that what we're trying to do, at least my understanding of what it is that we're trying to do, is that we're trying to be open to restructuring programmatically, in any area. I agree with you that we should be open to anything. But the purpose of the exercise is to restructure in order to get our expense structure back into a manageable place that we can manage it, or we're going to have to look at increasing our revenue stream. So it's great to come look at all these districts and look at the great things they're doing, and we're going to start hearing about all-day kindergarten, and we're going to start hearing. I just want to caution.
That's not what I was saying, though.
I'm just saying when you.
But wait, I think one of the biggest mistakes we can make is do this exercise based on a financial outcome that we're looking for. I think that we're at a point in time where one of those cases may be, okay, this is what the district has to look like with no new revenue sources, right? But the point is we're going to do things not just because of budget constraints, but education in this country is changing too. And bringing the district in, in education in the 21st century, there are things that people are doing around that. So there are a set of things that we're going to do for budget purposes, but there are some things we're going to do because they're things that we should do. And so let's not constrain the binary in or out based on how much money does it cost. at this point in time. I think, you know, the point out there isn't that there's an open checkbook to do this with. It's that, you know, what can we do smarter? I mean, and those are things, and maybe there are things that don't cost money that we should do differently. This is an opportunity to look at everything that we have. This isn't just straight budget driven. The budget has created the impetus to do this, but we would be wasting the opportunity if we only did this to solve for a budget number. So you guys can weigh in.
Mrs. Stufen?
Okay, so I'll weigh in. I really think that we want to lay out what we can be, okay? You know, with the thought in mind that we are visionary for education, because that's what we're known for, right? I mean, I really think that we can be that we are at a point where we have to think out of the box, that we look at best practices, we look at innovation. I understand that, you know, at the end of the day, we're going to have to look at what can this community sustain revenue-wise. You know, so I think that we can't, you know, be out there and expect that, you know, the sky's the limit for funding, but at the same time, so it's common sense, reality constraints, I think, parameters, but still, I mean, you know, I don't know if we've done this in a long time, and I believe that we have the people in place that can provide that for us.
Nothing else?
I would like some clarification.
Okay.
Based on this discussion. I hear two themes. I hear a theme that says we want to look at a district bringing the best practice into the district, making changes we need to because it's best practice, what's good for kids and all of that, but also that there's a budget restraint. And the budget restraint is not the open checkbook. So the way I was thinking of approaching this was to say, what does the district look like to sustain our present revenue stream and everything else we have for 5 years, bringing changes about either because restructuring is needed because of curriculum, education, student interests, but also part of it is because of budget, that we have to make some changes because of budget and restraint. Then a second model that says, and here is another model that looks at more innovation, more change, but maybe have increasing costs for the district in the long term. So it was like two parallel streams going at the same time. What can we sustain on our present revenue, expenditure, financial situation, and then what does it look like as an optional program of innovations in that? So almost two models for the board to at least start looking at. That was, but I want board member feedback if that's what you're thinking.
I didn't realize I left my mic on. Where I was at the last meeting is that we have a structural problem and that there are significant factors that we do not take into consideration as we focus, as I'm sitting here for 4 years, on the annual budget. What my understanding was, where we were, was we want to include a complete review and a more complete documentation of our capital requirements and include that in our conversation with the community that we have. I don't know, is it 28 million before we do Lincoln, 10-year, the numbers are huge. We've had discussions in committee where we say we want to look at this investment in technology that we're making as this is a capital improvement. We want to look, we had at the last curriculum and instruction meeting, a discussion around investment in curricular materials. We're looking later on, if we get to it, the adoption of K-5 social studies, new materials which cost $500,000. I mean, we have some serious, and that's just one subject matter that is just 6th grade levels. We have some serious capital requirements when you look at curriculum and what we're trying to do. I mean, I agree with you that we want to look at, you know, instructional practices, if there are things that we can do, that we can pull it apart and do it in a better way. But there are some significant hurdles facing education across the state, across the United States, in terms of funding, in terms of what we're asking our kids to do. I agree with what Mr. Pernod said in that we want to look at two models. We want to look at how do we structure the district and offer the resources within the financial world that we live in now. And then how could we improve upon the experiences for knowing full well that in curriculum and instruction, when we sat and looked at what our students who graduate from York High School do, and the high percentage number of kids who are entering their sophomore year of college, I mean, we provide an excellent education for the kids of Elmhurst. Could there be better? Absolutely. There's always room for improvement. I do believe Mrs. Stupman is a big proponent of continuous improvement, and I think we all should aspire to that. But this second model is one, and Mr. Pernod's advisory committee said on all of these different components that we could possibly alter, the underlying theme was keep the status quo, keep the broad education at the high school, keep the industrial technology program, keep the fine arts program, keep the, the elementary language programs. We're not willing as a community to give anything up. So I'm not really sure that I understand when you say restructure the district, for the future. I'm not really sure that I understand what components you're talking about. When I talk about restructuring, I think of it from a financial standpoint of allocating a portion of our revenue stream to capital improvements and coming up with the 10-year capital plan, not just the list of things that Mr. Hsu brings us that need to get worked on, but a funding plan for that, and a funding plan for the capital improvements in terms of technology, and a funding plan for continuous support of professional learning communities and of curriculum. So I guess I'm not really sure that I'm fully understanding your vision of what it is that we're trying to tackle. I think we have an excellent school district. I think we've invested in assessments for learning. I think we've invested in PLCs. I think we have invested in teams. We have invested in great curriculum. We have made a lot of really good investments, and I'm uncertain in terms of what components that are interchangeable we could move out. So I'm leaving the board. I'm tossing out for you, after 4 years on the board, what my vision is of where we are and what challenges we have to tackle. And I'm not sure that I'm understanding what issues you're driving at that we need to tackle.
If I can just restate what I think I heard Mr. Pernod say, and I'm going to leave it to him to correct me if I don't restate correctly. But I heard a two-scenario plan. One was if nothing changes, if the rate of inflation doesn't change, if our revenue stream doesn't change, what would the administration suggest we do to continue to innovate but restructure to live within what that revenue stream looks like? And then a second plan that is what an even better district could look like if there was another source of revenue or an increased source of revenue, which is, as of yet unspecified. But what could we look like? What does our potential look like? Is that correct?
Yeah, if there are additional costs, yeah, we would include that, because it's not going to be resource free in some instances. Again, for some things, we would restructure and say, here's a way we can restructure to maybe perhaps address the financial issues, but also best practice. I don't want to leave that, that's a possibility, and that should be something we concentrate on. But there may be other plans that we say, you know what, this is going to take resources, this vision, this structure is going to take additional finances, and I think that's the second model that I thought I heard the board want.
I agree with what you're saying.
And then I see the next step. Then it's us. It's up to the administration and the board to bring those plans to the community. Find out what resonates with the community. Find out what does not resonate with the community, and bring it back. And then with the new information we gather, bring that information into our plans, and then to present something to the community. Do we have consensus around that broad idea? Okay. All right, so let's move ahead with that. Excellent. Thank you. Is there more, Mr. Bloom?
Yeah, there's a couple more. One of them's
Okay.
quicker. So, Dave, you got everything that you needed there. The other piece, and this is on the operating side, and to Maria's point earlier, I mean, you can't divorce that from the capital side. And but the identification of alternatives for the long-term facilities plan is something that I think has to be worked through. But that's something that we've had on the agenda in the Finance Committee, and it's something that again we'll kind of take as we've got to start to flesh out. We've got a lot of information on it. We've got the facilities at a glance. We've got the projected budget. Starting to develop a couple of scenarios in conjunction with the administration on where that goes. And this discussion has to happen in parallel. But from a development of the story standpoint, I think while we'll turn over the operating side to the professionals, I think on the capital side we need to weigh in on some of that, and we'll work with them on that. So if the board's okay with that, the Finance and Ops Committee will continue to edit that plan. And then the last piece of this is a bit of an offshoot of the prior discussion we just had on the operations side, which is, we talk about innovation, we talk about, kind of removing some of the constraints to free thinking, and Dave starts to put this together. But the other piece of that is, this should be driven by the values and the desired outcomes of our community. And that's another piece of input that I think, that this is iterative. We're not going to wait to figure this out until Dave starts, assembling his thoughts. But by the same token, we've done mission vision work. I think we all saw mission vision up on the slides again yesterday. And as I get to thinking about that, and I thought about the DPIs, and we still have that space in between the two of them that connect them. And the question I had for the board was, is it called goal setting or something that links the DPIs to the mission vision and really starts to add a little bit more definition about the values and the desired outcomes that we're asking Dave to design something to produce. For instance, I mean, what is the community value? What are things that make Elmhurst special about our district? And it may not be something that if you were designing a district from scratch, you may decide to tack on to the plan and the model, but it may be something that, hey, we in our community are very proud of this particular thing, and we should seriously consider making sure that gets included. What do we mean by, every child challenged at every level? I mean, we have DPIs. Where do we go with it? I don't want to get too far into exactly what this is, but the question to the board is it worth continuing the discussion? We had talked about linking this kind of mission vision and the DPIs, and in other words, in a more succinct way, saying, what does it mean to be a lighthouse district? And is it worth continuing that discussion, or is that something that needs to run along with this as inputs that would help Dave as far as developing, I think, what would be scenario 2 in most respects? Kind of what do we want? And so, I don't know, I'll turn that over for discussion as to whether that exercise is something that we think we should include in this process.
My question to add on to that would be, are we burdening ourselves with too big of a task, making it so big that we could never accomplish it? So, Mrs. Ebner, you had your hand up, so I'll let you lead.
Question. I wanted to ask Mr. Pernod, do you need this information to do your task of the 2 different scenarios?
My plan was to look at the DPIs. We've already established what our goals are and what our accounting, our own self-accounting would be for the success of the district. I mean, that's, when we talked about this, we said, what would a successful district look like? We said these DPIs, I think, we're going to be adding the Harris poll and that DPI, those DPIs. So I think you have a pretty good overview of not only the hard data, but the soft data on satisfaction, all of that. I think the board should look at that in total and say, do the DPIs that we've now established, the key DPIs, really reflect the key indicators of a really successful district? Are those the ones that we really need to hang our hat on and say, if we're successful in these key DPI areas, the district is moving forward, and we are moving forward to be an outstanding district. If there are elements that we don't have that the board thinks are important, we probably need to have that discussion and say, where's an area that we're not addressing that is key to, an element of an outstanding school district? I think we have most of them, but I think it's a good question to come back to the board and say, look at the key DPIs. Are there areas that you don't think reflect an outstanding district that we're going to be capturing data on? And then drive the model from there. So what kind of pieces do we need to put in place to address moving the district forward on those key DPIs? And we've talked about that before. On some of these, they're not resource-free. On some of these, we're going to have to allocate somehow additional resources to reach there. On some, we can restructure. On some, we can reprioritize. But there may be some that we just say, you know what, in order to address this issue, we need X put in the district.
Karen, is that an
Mr.
exercise that marries with, I think we're sort of going down that path in some of our summertime things, the strategy stuff that we're talking about? Is that something that we dovetail with that? Is that covered as, or maybe another agenda item on the retreat or whatever that we're doing?
If you're referring to our last performance management committee meeting, yes, I think so. I think that's what we had talked about. I think it does, what Dave had said with the DPIs, and review them, and that's what we said we were going to do after the first year, is say, okay, we've had a year, do they really represent what we, what the community values and what we're aiming to aspire to be? Does that answer your question? I mean,
yeah, it sounds
I
like
think
it's on the agenda already.
For Performance Management Committee. But from the standpoint, if you're looking to me, board improvement, because we've looked at the vision, mission, values, key messages and things, I always have it in the back of my mind. I really do think that we're kind of molding this thing. And I really think that, whether we'd flip-flop our vision and mission, but, we keep talking about that is really what this community wants. But is it enough for people to know all those words and what it means to them every day? That is yet to be determined, but I think we're on that path. So, we start identifying, what are the student paths out of District 205, right? And so are those DPIs indicative or reflective of those paths? And are we defining our curriculum or, going through the, priorities in the curriculum instruction or, in that department, are they reflective of those student paths? Are we looking at student achievement, in all of the students that we have? And are they on the paths that we would like? You know what I mean? 4-year college bound, 2-year college bound, technical or professional, whatever you want to call it, or career bound, and life skills ready. So does that answer your question? Because I see it all. I mean, we really do have to keep all that in the back of our mind, and we're, molding it, I think, without putting, or, to someone's point, burdening, putting too much on.
Yeah, I think my question was that, and that David pointed out, he said it better than I did as far as what we were asking for, and it sounded like it was on the agenda for some of the stuff as we revisit the DPI. So to Jim's point about overburdening, maybe the answer to this question is we already are figuring this out, and we should just keep that in mind as we go to our summer review.
And I guess I would say it is all interrelated. This is all interrelated, people.
I just want to make sure that we don't take on so much at once that we get nothing done.
I don't think that that's what we've done so far, right, Dave and board?
I'm not saying that we have. Just want to make sure that that's not a situation we end up in. Yeah, Mr. Bloom and
I
Mr.
think
McDonough.
to your point,
No, I just wanted to say, you're right. Have we taken on too much that we get nothing done? And was one of the key things that we should have done is to do mission and vision and finish mission and vision and provide it. Or is that an unnecessary distraction from the things that we need to do now? I don't have an answer. I don't know. I'm asking people who've been through this a lot more than I have.
I've been through this a lot more than you have, but we have a mission and vision. It's very powerful words in our mission and vision. The only thing I see is it's not something you can memorize. So we don't have a 6-word thing that people can remember and they know it. So it's really powerful words, but it's kind of wordy. But I don't think we should do anything with that right now.
Mr. Bloom?
So I just did have one last, I mean, we talk about us doing this, but I think I do want to absolutely make the point to the public that this is, everybody is involved. This is a collaborative process, not just amongst the board and the administration, but the community as well. And you know, invite them to keep up with us and participate with us. And we want to hear what they have to say. And it's, you know, it'll take as long as it has to take. So, I mean, I don't think when you talk about biting off too much for us, I think that the point is that we are going to go down this road. I think we have to from a budget standpoint. We have to from, you know, various other things. So, at any rate, I'll stop.
Yeah, I agree. We owe it to our community before we cut more to have the discussion of what does the community want. And I believe that's the discussion we're going to embark upon. And to have a meaningful discussion, I think we need some concrete things to put in front of the community in terms of this is what the district looks like under these two or, you know, even possibly three different paths. Okay, so shall we move on? The next on our agenda is the approval of board meeting minutes. Approval of, does anybody have any changes to the January 22nd, 2013 or the February 12th, 2013 minutes? Mrs. Ebner.
22nd, under Curriculum and Instruction Committee report. This is just a real minor thing. Okay, so towards the end, it talks about a new social studies curriculum. It says a new social studies curriculum will be in place. I would like to change that to a new social studies curriculum will be brought before the board. Thank you.
Any other additions or modifications? Okay. Then have a motion to accept those minutes with the changes that Mrs. Ebner proposes. Or can we don't need a motion? So do we approve those as amended then? Very good. All right, next is the board committee reports, and we are right back to Mr. Bloom and Finance and Operations Committee.
There's no more.
Aren't you guys sick of me by now?
Yes.
Okay, done. No. Okay, really quick. We talked about January monthly financial reports. We are on budget, on plan. Chris, is there anything else I'm missing there? Okay. Student fees were on the agenda. Dave and Chris are going to be bringing for a first reading in March the proposed fees for next year, so we can talk about those then. Budget we covered, and status updates are just things that we keep on the agenda to make sure we don't forget. I'm done.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Bloom? Hearing none, let me move on to the Performance Management Committee.
Okay, performance management met, we had two topics on our agenda. One is a continuing conversation about administrative compensation and salary structure and some longer term things that we're looking at, and that discussion continues. And the other thing that we dove into a little bit more deeply is the Harris poll, and there's a couple of things that we drew out from our discussions. First of all, the Harris poll, the building level Harris poll results are going to each building principal. They're having discussions with their staffs. That's going to become part of their overall performance evaluation, and they will have goals to set for next year in terms of areas that they can pull out where they can make improvements within their individual buildings. At the same time, the Board of Education also has and owns part of those poll results. We have results, parents' view of the Board of Education. There's a staff view of the Board of Education with some data. As well, there's a piece that actually is tied to communication and I think decision-making, I think is the category. I'm not sure that I have that right, Mr. Pernod, but there was some feedback about how well the board communicates. So those were three areas. In looking at the Harris poll, there's two things. One is there's part that the board owns, that the board needs to take a look at. And so we carved out those three pieces the parents' point of view, staff's point of view of the Board of Education and the communication piece, and board improvement, Karen, the workaholic, is, but the point of this is that this is a review of how the board is perceived. Now, Mr. Pernod has done a great job of explaining, I think, to us at the last meeting and to his team, you know, the purpose of the Harris Poll is to establish a baseline, is for us to have an indicator, something to look at and to learn more about, not make assumptions around. And so I think with the help of Mr. Pernod, there are forums and opportunities for gathering feedback around particular areas that were of interest at the building level, at the district level. Everybody owns a piece of this. As well, the board needs to adhere to a similar process in that if we heard feedback from staff, from parents, there are going to be areas that we need to feather out a little bit more and better understand, and whether that's through focus groups, sitting down with people, sitting down with small groups of teachers, of staff, that's work that we own, that the board also has to do to get a better understanding of how we can improve our areas. And so that is going to rest with board improvement. It makes sense. Board improvement, we're looking to improve the Board of Education. As well, when we set the DPIs, there were things that we kept putting in the parking lot saying, well, once we get the Harris Poll, when we look at district performance indicators, there's all the different areas that we have, student learning, there's operations and management, there's all sorts of areas. But one of the biggest areas that we really couldn't define was culture. And we intend on using top-level responses, overall perceptions by students, by staff, by parents, as our DPIs moving forward. This was an initial cut that the committee took a look at, and the recommendation was we need to sit with it, we need to read a little more thoroughly. I don't know, Mr. Pernod, if we had an opportunity to get the full board, the full pack that we had gone through. We were going to send that out electronically to you. If you haven't received it yet, I'm sure we'll get it to you in the next 24 hours. Some great reading for the weekend. But it is very interesting, and there's a lot there that you can, you know, learn about people's perspectives about the different constituencies. But what we had recommended is that moving ahead towards looking towards the summer planning and doing the Performance Management Committee kind of own the DPI discussion over the summer meeting, and we expect that Performance Management moving ahead would also plan a meeting in June or July that was focusing not so much on every single DPI and where we are, because we won't have the academic pieces back yet, but kind of spending some time adding and choosing which components of the Harris Poll you choose to use as our baseline data moving forward. So we have some initial recommendations, but that's something that the whole board would look at in that time frame, June or July. And then there will also be, Dave and his team will be looking into all of these areas too and making sure, making the recommendations back to us. The last conversation that we had in performance management was really kind of summarizing what the purpose of this individual committee was. We really kind of summarized it. How do we know how to measure things? That's really the purpose of DPIs, is how we measure what we're doing, and how do we know when we get there? That's really kind of what lives in performance management. And the other piece of it is, what kind of an employer do we want to be? So over the year, we've talked about things like employee retention, we've talked about job descriptions, HR staffing, performance evaluations, the hiring process. That's really kind of what exists in this committee. We moved our March 21st meeting to April 8th, and that's it. So if there's any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Hirsch? Hearing none, we'll move along to the superintendent's agenda, the consent agenda. On that, there are items A through K. A is personnel reports, B, financial reports, C, approval of the waiver application that we talked about earlier in this hearing. D, approval of a donation to York High School. Mr. Thibodeau, and forgive me if I'm butchering your name, sir, is would like to donate his used golf simulator to the Boys and Girls Golf programs at York. Estimated value of this donation is between $3,000 and $4,000, and we thank you very much for that. Item E is an approval of donation to Jefferson. The Jefferson PTA would like to donate 2 smart boards, and we thank you for that. F is the approval of a donation to all 8 of our district elementary schools by the Elmhurst, by Team Elmhurst Soccer Club. Thank you. I got to get the words in the right order. What they propose to donate is 2 pop-up goals per school, 8 soccer balls in a bag for each school, for a total value of about $2,500. And thank you, Team Elmhurst, for that. G, we start to spend money. Approval of AT&T Wide Area Network Switched Ethernet Service Agreement. Approval of AT&T Managed Internet Service and Illinois Century Network Internet Service Agreements, both of which are to speed up the bandwidth of our backbone data network. Item I, approval to display K through 5 social studies instructional materials. J, approval to revisions of policy 5:30, hiring process and criteria. It is the second reading and adoption of this policy. And finally, K, approval of revised policy 5:185, family and medical leave. This is the second reading and adoption of that as well. So, with that, I have a motion for the superintendent's consent agenda. Or, I'm sorry, let me ask, does anyone want to remove any items from the consent agenda? Mrs. Ebner?
I'd like to remove item I, approval to display K through 5 social studies instructional materials.
Any others? Mr. McDonough?
I'd like to remove item H.
Item H?
The AT&T Managed Internet Service and Illinois Century Network Internet Service Agreements.
Okay. Can I have any others? Hearing none, can I have a motion, Mrs. Hirsch?
I move that we accept the superintendent's consent agenda, less items H and I.
Second.
Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Deroni, that we approve the superintendent's consent agenda with the exceptions of items H and I. I believe, since we're spending money, we need a roll call vote. Mrs. Walsh?
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mrs. Dronning?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Ms. Steuven?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes. That's 7 ayes, no nays. The motion passes. Now, for item H, Mrs. Hirsch.
I move that the Board of Education, 1, approve entering into a 5-year agreement with AT&T for 500 megabit per second managed internet service at a cost of approximately $3,485 per month, plus taxes and fees. 2, approve entering into a month-to-month agreement with Illinois Century Network for 100 megabit per second internet service at a cost of approximately $17 per month. 3, authorize the superintendent or his designee to sign the AT&T Managed Internet Service Pricing Schedule and the Illinois Century Network Service Agreement. And 4, authorize the superintendent or his designee to execute AT&T E-rate rider with option A, selected to commence services even if E-rate funding has not been committed by Universal Service Administrative Company.
I'll second.
Moved by Mrs. Hirsch. Motion on the floor. Oh, I'm sorry. Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, thank you. Seconded by Mr. McDonough. And let me paraphrase the motion on the floor. That is the approval of the AT&T Managed Internet Service and Illinois Century Network Internet Service Agreements. Any discussion, please? Mr. McDonough.
I think I could have pulled G or pull H because my comment is really general. I think that I would like people to take a look at the documents that support this as an example of how a public procurement process should occur and should be done. And I'm really kind of congratulating Chris and David for the way you've done it. The spec was written with specific reference to the technology plan. They designed a spec. The proof is in the pudding. The spec was written so well that you had 6 bidders, was it? And that's signed there. That's a well-written. The score sheets, you should take a look at them. This is the way public procurement. So one of the things you talked about, Mr. Oney, about dispelling some of the myths, I think there's a myth out there that we're not spending money wisely. We're not strategic in the way that we're spending it. We're not using it efficiently for the benefit of the taxpayer. And frankly, from the outside, from looking at the score sheet, this looks like a well-run procurement process. And I think that's an important thing to tell our stakeholders, that we're doing the best we can. Knowing Mr. Purnell and the way he's going to expect of his staff, he's going to even make this process even better, and we expect that. But I thought it was important to just point this out as an example of when government works right.
Thank you for pointing that out. Any other discussion? And I was going to say that the comment did have to be longer than the motion, and you did succeed in that. So, hearing no more comments, Mrs. Walsh.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes. That's 7 ayes, no nays. The motion passes. And now for item I. Mrs. Hirsch.
I move that the Board of Education approve the public display of the proposed K-5 social studies instructional materials.
I second that
Stufen?
motion.
Moved by Mrs. Hirsch, seconded by Mrs. Stufen. The motion on the floor is the approval to display the proposed K through 5 social studies instructional materials. Any discussion, please? Mrs. Ebner.
Thanks. I just wanted to make a brief comment. The board finalized the way that we want to see proposals from the administration. That was done at the end of January. And the curriculum group under Charles Johns quickly received that way that we want to see proposals and turned it around. And now what you're seeing as part of these materials, the attachments, are the key areas that we want to see for administrative proposals. So it's a really good way to look at it. Thank you for doing this. It's student outcomes, financial impact, employee performance and satisfaction, opportunities, challenges, and unintended consequences, and metrics. So it's what the board wanted to see, and I'm thankful that we finally have finalized this proposal method. And then just to talk a little bit about the materials, this is approval to display for how many days? 30?
By law, we're required to display them for 30 days.
30 days, right. And I just wanted to highlight some of the reasons why we're doing this. There are deficiencies in the current curriculum. It's over 10 years old, and there's a lack of common assessments, and there's a deficiency when kids move from fifth grade to 6th grade. So this new curriculum has addressed some of these deficiencies, and the financial impact, it was budgeted for our current year. And the other thing I wanted to point out too is the way that the curriculum adoption was done. It included a committee of teachers, staff, librarians, a wide variety of people that came together. And actually, there was a survey for parents and teachers, so it really was well received. It should be well received because so much input was put into this. And then throughout the committee process, teachers were asked for input and had a voice in the final analysis of the materials and recommendations, which is so important. So I was very happy to read that. And one of the ways that we'll know that this is successful is when we have the new park assessment system. We'll be able to tell, because with this curriculum adoption, we're going to be teaching kids more inquiry-based skills, presentation skills, and with the park assessments, part of that will test students' ability to analyze text and to write about their analysis. And this is what this new curriculum will be teaching. So this is a very nice study. Thank you.
Mrs. Hirsch.
One other comment that I agree with Mrs. Ebner. We've been asking for proposals to spend money to come to us with all of these questions answered. And this is the first time that we've had it. And it was a great response, and it was a very quick turnaround on the curriculum department's part. The other thing that I would like to highlight, though, is that I'm very excited because it's a strong investment in, actually not civics, it's one of my favorites, but geography. And it is feedback from the middle school so that they spend a lot of time in 6th grade teaching kids map skills and geography and how to read charts, and we're moving it down to younger, and the manipulatives and the things that we saw are things that I think are going to be very engaging. And when we talk about educating children so that they can operate in a global economy and understanding geography, the world seems to be getting smaller. You can get in a plane and end up in China before you know it. And I think that this is going to be a great skill. Our kids are going to be much more grounded in geography. I think that is a huge leap forward.
Mrs. Stufen.
I think you did a great job, because I'm going to highlight, I mean, pretty much the same thing as Ms. Ebner and Ms. Hirsch said, but this, for someone that wasn't part of the curriculum instruction committee and saw the pre-work, it helped me as a board member that's not as close to it really get a good understanding of the bigger picture, why we did it, what we expect as outcomes, how we're going to measure that, and the collaborative nature, not only with every, I'm going to say, group of people that are involved in this process, right, from conception at the central office to the classroom, and parents. But you took into account, this is a K through 5, but in this documentation talks about feedback and input that you received from, you're a feeder, K through 5 is feeder to the middle school. So it's exciting to see. Thank you very much. It'll be exciting to see the middle school and high school, pieces to this and really demonstrate what we want to be, which is a unit district, and leverage that, because we should. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Then this just requires a voice vote. So all in favor to approve the display of K through 5 social studies instructional materials, say yes. Yes. All opposed, say no. Motion carries. Thank you. All right, now let's see if we can pick up some momentum here. Upcoming meetings. Wednesday, February 27th, Board Improvement and Policy Committee at 7 p.m. in the District 205 Center in these very rooms. Wednesday, March 6th, the Curriculum Instruction Committee will meet at 7 p.m. in these same rooms. Tuesday, March 12th, the Finance and Operations Committee will meet at 6:30 to get a running start in these same rooms. Tuesday, March 19th is our next regularly scheduled full Board of Education meeting at 7:30 p.m. in the same room. And Thursday, March 21st is the Performance Management and Committee meeting, which will meet at 7 o'clock. Oh, I'm sorry, it's moved to April 8th. Sorry, that Performance Management Committee meeting is moved to April 8th. Thank you for pointing that out. All right. Moving on, we have on our agenda action out of closed session item, and there will be no action on that item at this meeting. And then our second to the last item is board communications. Anything to share with the board? Mr. McDonough.
I don't know if I'm the most qualified person to talk about it, but last night's session on English language learners was a wonderful event in that it defined a group with some unique needs. It helped us identify how we as a district have some real challenges in trying to meet those needs. There's a significant body of law that needs to be followed that's very specific, and at the same time there's some very innovative ideas out there floating around, and it was a real eye-opener to a part of our district that I think is probably not visible to other parts of our district, and it's going to be a real challenge. It is to face with all the other district challenges, financial evaluations, et cetera, to take this on. It was just a real good session. Congratulations to Dr. Johns and your staff for putting this together. It really was a good session.
Thank you for pointing that out. That's was truly noteworthy. And frankly, I heard a lot of exciting things. Now, is there anything else to be shared? Hearing none, then I declare this meeting adjourned.